Like I've heard people say, I'm a pan-millennialist. I think it'll all pan out in the end.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Scripture in Black and White. I'm Anthony Walker here with my good friend Bobby Harrington. Bobby, it is great to see you.
Great to see you, Anthony. I'm really enjoying doing this series with you. I've enjoyed all of them, but for some reason, I find this one more enjoyable. So thank you.
Yeah, this has been great this season, and we hope that you all have enjoyed it as well. We've talked recently about the new heavens and new earth, and that is an enjoyable topic to deal with, and we hope that it was beneficial to you as well. Today, Bobby, share with us what we're going to chop up today on Scripture in Black and White.
All right, brother. So, in case somebody's joining us for the first time, up until this point, we tried to talk about the things that would really be essential to what Scripture teaches about the end. So, we talked about what happens when you die, and then we've talked about the second coming of Jesus, the resurrection of the dead, the final judgment, hell, and then just our last session, as you mentioned, the new heaven and new earth. We want to go back, if we can think back in terms of, we've talked about the new heaven and new earth, which is obviously in the future. And we want to go back before that, before the final judgment, and some things related to the second coming and resurrection of the dead. And we want to sort of move beyond the essential elements into what for some people will be important or personal elements. So let me mention by way of 5 key things, and then we're going to look at 5 end time paradigms. Now, if you're listening to this or you're watching us on YouTube, you may be thinking to yourself, that's a lot of complexity. And I hope it won't feel very complex when we go through it. But if it does, we want to encourage everybody, go to renew.org, download the ebook, What the Bible Teaches About End Times. And that'll help you, but I'm going to try to keep it in the realm of not too much complexity. But if there's one session that's going to explain how all Protestants and Catholics and even Eastern Orthodox understand end times, it'll be in one of these ways of describing things that I'm going to go through now. So it's one session, but it's going to deal with the whole territory. So I hope our listeners, or again, those who are watching on YouTube, find it helpful. Sound good, Anthony?
Oh, it sounds great. Sounds great. So, as he's pointing out, we're going to deal with a few things, and we like to, as you point out, Bobby, keep it digestible, keep it palatable to where you can bite off just enough to digest in one setting. So we'll look at these particular perspectives, if you will, different elements of end time belief systems, if you will, and hopefully you'll learn about this, and you may even learn about your own theology. I'll share this before we dig into it, Bobby. I went to a class, a free class that Lipscomb had. This was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was on eschatology. And a good friend of mine, we both went. And, the class was all day, probably about 4 hours. They served lunch and everything. And when we left, he and I, we were talking, and I said, man, I learned more about what I believe about end times. We tend to set our belief system on the shelf when we deal with the book of Revelation or we deal with end times. We'll set that aside. But it's good to know, hey, what do you really believe about this? What do you understand about it? So hearing the different perspectives and then understanding what I already knew gave me a fuller appreciation of end times study. So that's our hope in this session, is to kind of share some information that again, from different perspectives. Some of it right off the bat, you're probably going to say, okay, I don't believe that. Okay, that's fine. Some of it you may have been unaware of to say, well, I didn't even understand this. And some may fortify what you already believe. So, Bobby, I'm ready to dig in.
Well, let me just say this to our listeners. I think it's really important to try to listen as a truth seeker, not as somebody who's trying to find, I already agree with this.
Hmm.
Because and I'm speaking for myself, if I've believed something and then I hear something that's not that way, I don't like it because I don't want to change and I don't want to deal with the ambiguity or the frustration or the insecurity. And I get that. I don't think you'll have to do a lot of that in this session, but I just want to ask everybody to take a learner's posture. Jesus teaches, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God," and seek, knock, pursue, because it's only those who seek that find, and that earnestly desire and pursue God's truth on these things that ultimately find it. So just be that kind of person. I'm just going to expose us to the, or we are just going to expose people to the different paradigms today. But then starting next week, I'm going to be taking a stand, and some people might not agree. And so I'm trying to say respectfully, here's what different people believe. Here's what good, godly people believe. And even though I don't believe like they do, which I'll get into next week, I still respect them, and they're my brothers and sisters in Christ. And
Amen.
as we pointed out, these beliefs are not essential for one's salvation. So let me mention the five different beliefs, and then the five paradigms of
Okay.
how people understand these beliefs. The first is the millennium, which again, that's based on Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 6. It's 1,000-year reign of Christ. And what does that mean? Is it literal that he does that after he comes back? Is it figurative that it's talking about the reign of people in the heavenlies and the power of the church to expand? Exactly what is that? Then the second area is the Antichrist and other evil leaders and teachers. So in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, it talks about the Antichrist. In Second Thessalonians, chapter 2, it talks about the man of lawlessness. Like, what's that? And is that a real thing or not? Some look at it as a real thing. Other people just describe it as symbolic. So how you work on that, that's something you'll have to land on for yourself. The third area is the rapture. Now, the rapture is this, it actually comes from a Latin expression, raptura, from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, of how Christians will be caught up in the air to meet Jesus. Now, is the rapture, when that happens, does that happen before there's tribulation? Does it happen in the middle of the tribulation? Or does it happen at the end of the tribulation? Or could it be there's no tribulation at all? So different people will understand it differently. The next area is the tribulation. Some
Mm.
people look at it as a 7-year period of cosmic disasters, persecution, and evil at the end. Some people look at that as happening after the rapture. Other people just say, no, at the end, before Jesus comes back, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard times. And then the fifth area is the restoration of ethnic Israel. What we're talking about here is the Jewish people turning to God, turning to Jesus as the Messiah. And what's God's plan for ethnic Israel? Does he have them in the land now so that there'll be a national revival and everybody turns to Jesus just before the end, or what? So we'll look at those five teachings. Anthony?
Yeah, we've got some digging to do because I know just on each of these areas, there are varied belief systems. The 1,000 years, as you pointed out, some have issues of where they place that time, and then there are others that look at it with, is it even 1,000 years? Is it a symbolic situation? So that's going to be a good one to dig into, and all of these will be. So again, these perspectives and these positions, paradigms, how you've pointed them out, we want you to hear them in their in clarity so that you'll understand them well. Help us, Bobby, with the millennium.
Okay. So it's Revelation chapter 20. It's actually, that's the only section in the New Testament. And I would argue that even people who see Old Testament passages as being fulfilled in the millennium, they read that into Revelation chapter 20,
Mm-hmm.
verses 1 through 6. So, what it talks about is the dead being brought to life and reigning with Christ for 1,000 years. So, it basically, what you're going to do with the millennium boils down to there's different angles on it, but there's two basic perspectives. One is that it's literal, that even though it's apocalyptic literature in the book of Revelation, that it's kind of understood literally, so that people who understand it that way look at that this happens after Jesus comes back, before the final judgment, and that people are literally raised, the righteous are raised, and they live on earth for 1,000 years with Jesus the Messiah. Then at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is unleashed. He causes all kinds of bad things. Gog and Magog turn against the people, like against the godly people, and then God intervenes and destroys them, and then you have the final judgment. So that's more of a literalistic view.
Okay.
The other view is more of a symbolic view, that if you read through the book of Revelation, you'll notice several places, like, for example, Revelation 7, the first part, and then you see it repeatedly in some parts throughout the book of Revelation, where it seems like there's this description of the heavenly realm and what's happening in the heavenly realm while things are going on earth. And so a large number of people understand the millennium as symbolic of the reign of Christ through the church, that description or that vision is recapitulated through the book of Revelation several times. And what it's describing is that those who have died, they're in the presence of God. And what is happening is Satan has been leashed. He can't stop the church, he can't thwart the church. And so the church can expand throughout the world. Now, at the end, when I say at the end of time, or toward the end of time, uh, those who understand the millennium to be symbolic believe that starting in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 11, it describes the unleashing of Satan. He's no longer bound. He goes hard after the church and causing false teachings and all kinds of evil. And they would point out that that is taught in other places, even in Matthew 24, where Jesus warns people that at the end things will be tough. And so, what they envision then is the church maximizes, the gospel goes to all the nations. Satan can't stop it, but then at some point, after reaching all the nations with the gospel, meaning somebody in every people group or multiple people in every people group has come to faith in Jesus, and it's coming to the end, and Satan is unleashed on planet Earth to do all kinds of evil. Is that
Mm.
helpful again?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's um, a great explanation of how people deal with this millennium, and if however you deal with it. And one of the things that I would point out here, however you deal with it, it further explains some of your other belief systems. So like if you
That,
believe that it is a literal 1,000 years, then you're going to interpret other things based off of that. If you believe that it is figurative or symbolic, that's going to feed into that as well. Aren't there are some positions that are held, kind of, you can put them in categories on how they deal with this millennium. You've got the post millennial, you've got the pre-millennials, you've got amillennialism. How do you differentiate those in that explanation that you just
yeah.
broke down?
So what's great about you bringing this up is that each of the five perspectives on the end that we're going to describe are based on millennial. Okay, so
Hmm.
preterist, which is basically a way of describing they believe all the prophecies of Revelation are pretty much complete. All the prophecies of the Bible, except for the second coming of Jesus, they're all pretty much complete. They're called preterist amillennialists, or we would refer to preterist amillennialism. So what that means is the passages in the Bible have been mostly fulfilled. For example, R.C. Sproul is a person a lot of folks like, and
Hmm.
this is more of his view that all the passages are fulfilled. So literally, what they believe is that we're just waiting for Jesus to come back. Nothing else is going to happen. This is a common view, Anthony, with Presbyterians. Typically, conservative Presbyterians will hold to a view like this. There's another one I'll describe, or Churches of Christ, Restoration Movement people, Methodists, a lot of more sort of people who are really like fact based and logical, and they're always looking for systems where everything's kind of explained. I guess everybody's looking for ways that are explained, but in a Presbyterian, Church of Christ, or a United Methodist sense, there's not so much belief that miracles still happen, or miracles are going to happen, or you're going to have Satan and demons doing all that stuff. So they tend to be preterist amillennials, meaning passages have mostly been fulfilled and the church can expand because the millennium is the reign of Christ. Now, the next view, and we'll go through each of these in more detail, I'll just introduce them to our listeners right now. The classic amillennialism, or what is often just called amillennialism, they believe the church expands, but then they believe at the end there's going to be tribulations and difficulties. And there's a man named Cornelius Venema has a book called The Promise of the Future. He does a great job of describing that view. Then the third view is historic premillennialism. So if the millennium is the 1,000 years, the historic premillennialists, or the people throughout history, it's kind of a classic view. They have the view that things are going to happen, and then Jesus comes back, and then he reigns for 1,000 years on the earth. They don't believe that the millennium is describing the expansion of the church. They believe the millennium, the 1,000 years, is literal, and it's really going to happen at the end of time, before the final judgment. Then you have the dispensational premillennialists. Now you might be thinking, what? So they're premillennialists. They believe we're living before the millennium, but they also believe there's different dispensations. They primarily believe that there's a dispensation for the Jews in Israel, and that's separate and apart from the dispensation of the church. Now, although they've got a weird name, they've been very popular in North America. So if I said Left Behind, the Left Behind series, a lot of our listeners are going to know that. And the Left Behind series is Dispensational Premillennialism. It's also the late great Planet Earth, a book that had a lot of influence on people, including me, helped me to come to faith in Jesus. And then Dallas Theological Seminary is distinguished because it's a North American seminary, Protestant seminary, and they really emphasize dispensational premillennialism. In fact, I'll tell you an interesting story. One of my professors was a guy, Bruce Waltke. I studied under him at Regent College in Vancouver, Canada. And he taught a class on Old Testament theology that I took with him. But he was just a wonderful scholar. He had a couple of earned PhDs, one in Old Testament at Harvard and another one at Dallas Theological Seminary. So I got to spend time with him, and he told the class this part, how he was responsible as an instructor at Dallas Theological Seminary. He was responsible that all of the doctoral graduates understood dispensational premillennialism and agreed with it. And then he changed his mind and didn't believe it himself anymore. So he resigned and went to teach at Westminster Theological Seminary that has more of an amillennial view, or the millennium is happening right now. And then, thank you for being patient with me. The
Oh
last
no.
view is postmillennialism. And a postmillennialist believes that the world is going to get better and better and better, and then Jesus will come back and reign for 1,000 years. So, or I'm sorry, I said he'll come back. He's actually reigning now. So it's a version of amillennialism.
Mm-hmm,
He's
mm-hmm.
reigning now. Satan can't stop the church. Everything gets better and better and better, and then he comes back and has the final judgment. So, and that's a guy named Douglas Wilson, who's become very popular. He lives in Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, and has a book called Heaven Misplaced, Christ's Kingdom on Earth. And it used to be only guys that really believed this lived in the 1800s, or, up to about, I don't know, 1940s, um, who believe this, but he's a very popular writer, speaker, and he advocates for postmillennialism. So, one way to think about it, postmillennialism is at the end of the millennium, during the millennium, everything gets better and better, and then Jesus comes back and has the final judgment. Just going backward on them, dispensational premillennialism, there's different dispensations. Some really interesting stuff's going to happen with Israel. The church is going to be taken away, and then you'll have the literal millennium on the earth. And then historic premillennialism, they believe when Jesus comes back, there'll be 1,000 years on earth, and they don't believe there's two separate dispensations, but they believe there's things going to happen at the end. Classic amillennialism is the view that uh, the church can expand, it can grow throughout the earth. There will be difficulties at the end, and then the final judgment, and then it'll be heaven and hell. So, if we can, let me just pause there, Anthony, in case you want to jump in, and then I'd like to do a little bit deeper dive on preterist amillennialism. And if people, I'm going to try to describe it well in case you're not watching on YouTube, but I do want to encourage those uh, listening. If you watch it on YouTube, we've got some good diagrams that will help you to understand this.
Right, right, right. So again, one of the things I wanted to touch back on, there was a phrase that you used. This is apocryphal language. That term apocrypha, or apocalyptic, excuse me, apocalyptic language. That term means to uncover that
Yeah,
which has been covered up. So,
it's actually a
um,
word for revelation, apocalypsis
right.
in, yeah.
Right,
So it's
right. So the word revelation, that is apocalyptic. And so when we understand this is a revealing, this is an uncovering,
Yeah.
But even in that uncovering, there is some figurative language, and you gotta kind of deal with that, and that's where these different um, methods, if you will, of interpreting how do we deal with this millennium. We can all point to it to say, okay, it's in there, it's in the book. And you'll have four different people in the room reading the same passage to say, it's right here, I'm reading it, but they're going to interpret it based off if this is literal, based off of what they understand about what Christ has said about this. How does this line up? And based on what it means for us now. If we believe, for example, as you pointed out, if you believe it's going to get better and better and better and better, that's going to create a frame of mind. That's going to create a motivation within you. Oh man, it's going to turn. I know it's bad now, but just wait. It's going to get better. If you are of the mindset, hey, this is it. This is as good as it was going to get was probably 60 years ago. And everything is going to just continue to get worse until he returns. That creates a paradigm. It creates how you're going to look at it and how you believe of the reign of Christ. If you think, hey, he's coming and we're teaming up, well, I can't wait till he gets here because I'm going to. So again, it's good for us to know these positions. Bobby, would you? I think I know where you're going to go with this. This is not an essential. Like it's if I have a premillennialist view, it's not, it's going to affect how I live, but we may disagree. Or if I have a post-millennial view, I have an amillennial view, like you said, we may disagree on this eschatological position,
So
but we can still be good folk together.
yeah, let's talk about. So we've already said that these five different end time paradigms are not essential for our salvation, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
essential, important, and personal. First bucket, second bucket, third bucket.
Mm-hmm.
These issues are mostly going to be second and third buckets. And in Renew Network, for example, we're going to have all five represented. So we definitely want to show respect to our brothers and sisters who, view these things differently. Even in the church where I serve as lead minister pastor, there are differences
Mm-hmm.
amongst us.
Mm-hmm.
My son,
Mm-hmm.
for example, holds different views than I do on these. And so it's important we show respect, but it's also important that we be diligent to
Yeah.
understand what it's saying. Like some people take the approach, like I've heard people say, I'm a pan millennialist. I think it'll all pan out in the end. And but and which is funny and there's some truth to it, but it's also deceiving because a lot of people just adopt that and then they never study it. Now I'm going to say this: I'm more of a classic amillennialist, and that means I think there's going to be tribulations. I think there's going to be an antichrist figure. I think that Christians will live through some significant difficulties, and I think it's important to know that because we can prepare uh, it prepares our minds. It teaches us how to evaluate tribulation and difficulty, and it helps us to see that God doesn't abandon us when we experience difficulties. And also, I think there's some wisdom if we're going to live through that period to know what it's like, so that we can prepare ourselves. So the guy who says, I'm just a pan millennialist, it's all going to pan out, part of me goes, I don't agree with thinking that way, because I think it would be helpful to come to your own views, because depending on your views, it's going to affect how you live. And I
Mm-hmm.
want
Mm-hmm.
everybody to live well. So that's my view on it, Anthony.
And when I was in college, and we barely touched on the depth of these positions, but my professor shared that You may have some blended, positions. You may have some that believe a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and kind of puts it together. And he shared from his perspective. You may not see too many that are just completely all in one. Hey, I'm premillennialist all the way, and they say, well, what do you say about this? And at least makes them think. Or I'm completely this particular view, but I'm always intrigued and ready to learn, as you've encouraged us to put on a perspective of learning, and then as you evaluate, you'll come to your position.
That's right.